Story 1. By Reddit user Can You Not Do That Please? T0. When I was 7 years old, my father took my older brother and I to a cabin in the middle of literal nowhere for the week as a vacation. We also took our cat with us. Everybody has their own room, and I had the room furthest from the other two, positioned right where the woods started. There was a window right next to my bed, and on the right side there was a tree right next to it that I remember getting to climb the previous day, without success. The bedrooms were on the second floor, by the way, and the window didn't have any curtains or blinds to cover it. One night, I remember feeling really homesick and being unable to sleep. The cat was lying on the bed with me, and I was reading a comic book with a flashlight, when around 2 a.m. I began to hear a tapping on my window. I assumed that it was just a tree branch tapping on the window, because it was a windy night, until I began to hear whispers, and I remember just freezing in fear and feeling like a bunch of ice water had just been poured onto me. I could hear whoever it was tapping and saying things like, "Open up, son. It's Daddy. Let me in, Luke. It's cold out here." And the worst one that I heard, "Come on, it's Daddy. I just want to cuddle." I was too paralyzed by fear to do anything, but just lay on my side facing away from the window, terrified and close to tears. I knew it wasn't my father, and in my imagination I thought it was the boogeyman or some other creature that would gladly kill me. All the while my cat was hissing and clawing at the guy, and I just remember holding him and burying my face in his fur because he felt like a safety net, my one defense against this guy, because I couldn't work up the nerve to call for my father. And then I remember a horrible screeching noise, and I turned around to look to see what it was, and I could see this guy with the most maniacal grin that I have ever seen, like something out of a horror movie, dragging a pocket knife against the glass, making this horrendous noise. And I screamed bloody murder. The grin disappeared, and he just looked like a combination of horrified and absolute full of rage. But then my father came barreling into my room with his hunting rifle. And as you can imagine, seeing this made the guy panic and just sort of drop backwards. My father looked at me to make sure I was all right. Just as my brother ran in, he went off to go and catch the guy before he got away. But unfortunately, it wasn't a long drop, and the man probably only got a few bruises from it. He was gone by the time my father got down there, and we waited the night, nobody slept, before we packed up and went back home. To this day, I don't think they ever caught the guy, though I remember my father filing a police report and me having to talk to the police and give a description, and I'm still grateful for my cat, who turns 14 this week and is still feisty as ever, for providing me with comfort during that time. To whoever was outside my window that night, I hope we never meet again. Story 2. By Reddit user Nina the Weirdo 420. This happened last summer, so sorry if I don't remember a few details. Buckle up, folks. It was mid-July of 2019, when me and my friends were planning a weekend getaway at my friend's cabin. It was her grandpa's when we would visit from Canada, and he let my friend stay there with her friends for the weekend. Our parents only let us go if we had a chaperone, because who would let a bunch of 16-year-olds and one 17-year-old in a cabin for a weekend? My friend, who we will call S, decided to ask his older brother to look after us. He had just turned 25 the week before, so said yes because he had nothing else to do. So it would be me and 8 of my friends with my friend's brother. It was the day before the trip and I was pumped. I was still packing my bag and I got a call from an unknown number. I thought it was one of my friends, so I stupidly answered. When I answered, it was just some guy breathing. I hung up pretty fast and quickly texted my group chat what happened. They said I was probably just nervous and excited for the trip. I thought they were right and I was just being paranoid, so I put it behind me and went to sleep. The next morning was the day of the trip, and my friends were picking me up. We piled into 2 cars and drove 3.5 hours to the cabin. It was a nice cabin, private beach, 5 bedrooms, and a fancy-ass kitchen. Me and my friend Jay shared a room. Also, probably should have pointed out that it was 6 girls and 2 guys, so all the girls shared rooms, the guys shared a room, and the chaperone slept on the couch. My room was on the first floor near the kitchen, which had a big window. This is a key detail for later. That night, we were partying pretty hard, as teenagers do. All of us were drinking, blasting music, and being stupid. It wasn't until 1:30 we all went to our rooms and slept. It was about 4:30 when I got up and went to the bathroom. When I walked back, I noticed something from the window. It looked like someone staring at me. They waved and walked away, and I did what any rational person would do: scream my head off. I woke my roommate and 2 of the other girls. They asked what was going on, and I was panicking, saying there was a guy outside. Jay went to the kitchen with me to get water, only to realize our chaperone wasn't on the couch and the door was open. All of a sudden, he runs back inside with what looks like blood on his hand. He asked me if I was okay, and pretty much everyone in the house woke up and asked what was going on when we were all either hungover or still drunk. Our chaperone told us when he went outside to take out the trash bags full of alcoholic bottles, he noticed what looked like the guy who fit my description: tall, fat, wearing all black. He asked him if he could help the guy, and then the guy started attacking him, which is when he ran inside. My friend called the cops, and they caught the guy the next day when we were all eating breakfast. Apparently, the guy was a peeping Tom in the town where the cabin was, and would look into the girls' rooms and take pictures of them naked. We were all able to enjoy the rest of our weekend, but we all mutually decided never to go to a cabin again after that. Before I continue to the next story, I want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you are enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out. Thank you. Story 3 by Reddit user CMD6901. This story is an encounter my grandmother had back in early 2001. My grandma and grandpa just moved into a very isolated cabin in the North Georgia mountains to escape the fast-paced city life after they retired. The house was perched on the side of the mountain on about 5 acres of their property, with a very long gravel driveway from the so-called main road which connected the surrounding cabins. The closest house was about 1 or 2 miles away as the crow flies and 3 to 4 miles by road. So yeah, definitely a low-key spot that's very hard to find. Soon after they purchased the property, they began the moving process, and both grandparents ended up making separate runs from their old house to the new house. One night, my grandmother was alone at the new house in the mountains while my grandpa was back at the old house taking care of some final business and last-minute packing. He decided to stay there for the night and avoid the 2-hour drive back to the new house, in turn leaving my grandma alone in the middle of nowhere. She was fine with that and decided to go ahead and sleep to prepare for more moving the next day. At around 1 a.m., the house was dead silent, and all of a sudden there was a very loud knock at the front door. Now keep in mind you could easily hear someone if they drove up the driveway, but she never heard a car. The front door was all glass, so it basically sounded like someone was banging on a window. She was terrified to say the least, and decided to stay in bed and wait it out. The knocks came again, this time even louder. At this point her adrenaline and fear is through the roof, not knowing who could possibly be at the door this late at night in the middle of nowhere. Once again she stays in bed and waits it out. About 5 minutes passed, and there are no more knocks. She waits even longer to maybe hear a car drive away or something, but no car ever drove off. The only way someone could have been there is if they walked several miles through the woods to get there, or walked up the very long driveway. Nothing else ever happened that night, and nothing ever came of it. Still a pretty strange and creepy occurrence for such an isolated place. Story 4 by Reddit user LiveyKitty2332. Not sure if this belongs here or let's not meet, because while I did fear for my safety, I wasn't actually the target of what happened, so mods be sure to wag a finger at me if I made a bad call. On to the story. Written on my mobile, so sorry if something goes wrong. This was a long time ago, and I'm 27 now. So, I'm originally from Michigan, and my family had what they affectionately called a cabin way upstate. If you've never been to Upper Michigan, then I can describe it with one word: trees. Literally miles and miles of trees with maybe a river just to spice things up. The cabin, which was really a 2-room dwelling with no electricity, no ventilation, only a wood stove if it got cold, and worst of all, no indoor plumbing, which meant either a 10-minute drive to a campground to use its more modern outhouses, or braving the wooden outhouse my grandpa had built, which had a habit of attracting spiders. All this, plus barely any signal and no Wi-Fi, meant teenage me was super thrilled to visit it for a week during summer. Can you just taste the sarcasm? I was going with my mum. Dad was out of the picture. My 2 aunts, who never married, and my grandmother. The lack of any male figures is important to this story. For some reason, my family's idea of a vacation has always been the go to the most remote place they can find and sit outside in lawn chairs, while I was more the can we please go do something, anything type, so I was kind of left to my own devices most of the time. As a peace offering to me for the lack of anything to do and no privacy, the cabin literally had one queen-size bed which my grandma got. Everyone else got crappy roll-up cots. My mum set up a large 4-person tent in front of the cabin and got a camping cot for me. This kept me happy enough. So how the nights would go is we would have a fire, cook food, talk a lot. I'd mostly be texting my then boyfriend, now husband, when the signal was decent. Then they would go inside and I'd go to my tent to change and go to sleep. When we were visiting, the door to the cabin was only locked by a hook, and that was just to keep the door closed rather than any serious security, and normally the door would squeak so much it would wake me up from my tent. I would pull a blanket over my head to block out the morning sun and as an extra security to any bugs that had gotten in. My tent only had my suitcase, backpack, and a table with a lamp and bug spray next to me. I remember being asleep one minute, then awake the next because someone was unzipping my tent. I need glasses to see, so when I opened my eyes, I noticed it was super early in the morning. It was that time of morning when everything is greyish-blue and just enough light to see. And I remember seeing a really tall figure standing halfway in my tent. I also remember immediately knowing it wasn't anyone in my family because the size and shape was all wrong. I was frozen on the spot, peeking out from under a blanket as this man I have never met and can barely see starts looking around my tent. I'm only 14 or 15 at the time, and I'm sadly very much aware of what grown men can do to teenage girls. This guy is looking around for what feels like an eternity, and even starts coughing a bit, which really hammered home this was in fact a man because of the deep sound, before pulling back out of the tent and moving away towards the cabin. I am still frozen in fear with a million thoughts going through my head. Who is this guy? What does he want? Is he going to hurt me or my family? Etc. We had homes close-ish to us, but most of the owners were gone for vacation or the homes were for vacation themselves and empty. Plus, I really didn't know anyone in the area like my family did. I hear this guy walking around, and I think checking the cars nearby to see if they were unlocked. They weren't. So I broke free of my fear and grabbed the only weapon I had and can think of, a can of Off Deep Woods. I remember thinking I could use it like mace if he came back, because compared to other sprays, the deep wood stuff stings like a motherfucker when it's blown into your eyes, trust me, and just waiting to see what he would do. The next thing I heard was our cooler opening. We had 2 outside for drinks and unopened meats, and everything else was kept inside, and him rummaging around in the ice along with more coughing. Sounds finally stop when I hear him tip one cooler over, then footsteps heading back behind the house and up toward the outhouse. I'm still terrified this guy is around and I can't move. I'm practically crushing the can in my hands and I force myself to count to 30 before I can do anything. It was less than 20 feet from the tent to the door, but I sprinted it and immediately began banging on the door as loud as I could, calling for my mum. My aunt opens the door and all I get is, "There's a man outside," before I'm grabbed by my PJ shirt and practically flung inside the house by my 5'2" 50-something pacifist aunt and didn't stop until I almost hit the other wall. By now, everyone is awake and the adrenaline finally wears off because I break down in tears while my aunts lock down the cabin and my mum, now also crying, holds me while I tell her what happened. Phone calls to the police are made, and turns out we weren't the only one reporting a strange man walking around our property because the cops were already looking for this guy. Someone comes and checks out our place. The dickhead had stolen some meat along with dumping our drink cooler. My mum thinks looking for beer, before going up the hill behind the cabin to his property. Turns out he was super drunk and had spent the whole night walking the woods, drinking and looting what he could before going home to sleep it off. He denied ever seeing me, either due to my blanket or due to being wasted, and I don't think anything serious ever came about it except maybe a drunken disorderly, along with trespassing. The guy's brother came by later that week to apologize and pay us for what was stolen, and my mum slept out in the tent with me for the rest of the trip, more for her sake than mine. I still remember once we had calmed down, my mum asking me why I had a can of bug spray and getting embarrassed as I told her it was my makeshift mace. Everyone in the cabin laughed at that. I think more out of nerves than anything else. The bittersweet thing is, I don't ever have to worry about that guy again because we sold the cabin just this past year to the people next door, who paid over value because they were really interested, and I got a slice of the profits. I hated the cabin, but I will miss the memories now that it's only my aunt, mum, and me left from that side of the family. Sorry if this wasn't super exciting, but I can promise you it's far more intense living it rather than reading it. And to the drunk arsehole who thought it was okay to go running around people's property and terrify a teenage girl, I still buy off deep woods, and I'm far less afraid to use it on your dumb ass. Story 5. By Reddit user billymay. It's a long story, but when I was younger, my parents had a pretty large house that was provided by a business partner in my dad's business, as long as we'd pay the property tax. I guess he was holding on to the land, and he did actually end up selling it to a developer not long after we moved out. Anyway, it was on the edge of a large southern US city, but still retained many acres of woods around the outside, and you drove down this long gravel road to get to it. There was no gate or anything, and it was fairly peaceful, and nobody ever bothered us in the 10 years, except for once. The house was essentially a log cabin and had 8 bedrooms, an 8-car garage, and a massive full-length deck out back, and you could see the house was set on a slope and was 3 stories tall. The middle floor was at ground level at the front of the house, but a story up at the back, making the deck quite high. You could park a car under it and then some. The bottom floor was basically shared by my sister and I, both in our early 20s, and we drive around the back and down and park under the deck where we had a separate entrance to a living room and all the downstairs bedrooms. It was like our own 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom house. Now I think this is the place where I say we were not rich by any sense of the word, and we weren't used to the implications of living in what was a massive mansion. And I'm not a nervous Nelly, but this house had way too many windows at ground level and doors to keep them all locked. It was quite a chore going around making sure each night, and my dad had a habit of leaving a few unlocked around the house every day. I think there were 19 external doors and even more windows, so it took a while to make sure each day the house was secure. It was honestly big enough that someone could break a window on one end and you wouldn't know, so I was always a little worried about break-ins. Guess I watched too many horror movies. One night, we walk out onto the upper deck. It's dusk and getting quite dark, and we sit down on the chairs, chat and stare at the sky. Only we can hear something moving around under the deck. It was faint, but there was something scratching, and we could hear a kind of shuffling around, like someone was trying to move but be quiet. But I thought nothing of it, and thought it was a cat or raccoon, as we'd seen them around before. In a deep voice, kind of as a joke, I say, "I know you're down there. Get out before I call the police." The moment I say this, a person in all black clothing sprints from under the deck and into the darkening woods. Needless to say, we look at each other surprised and kind of scared. Upon investigating further, the lurker had managed to open a bedroom window downstairs about 2 inches. I never slept good in the house again, and promptly screwed every ground floor window shut with security screws. And bought a shotgun. During the daytime, I went walking the property and discovered an area with a lot of cigarette butts and beer cans of various ages very close to the edge of the woods with full view of the back of the house. I have no idea how long they had been watching us. My thought is that they approached from the backwoods and didn't even know we were home, so when we walked out into the deck above them, they were caught and had to run off. Story 6. This story was posted by the Reddit user 8 Toenails. This past New Year's was mine and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle and wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small removed private road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to our cabin. We got to the cabin, and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you needed to take stairs on the back side of the property to get to the front door. We got inside, and there was a booklet with all of the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season, don't be surprised if their contracted snowplowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. We unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night, I booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked to the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks. But there they were. Immediately, we remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by. But the issue was we saw the tire tracks because of the snow. And who plows in the dark? We also knew that once we were at our cabin, we had no service on our cell phones. So we figured we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts and ask them if one of their friends had stopped by the apartments. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our hosts, but didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10, and we didn't want to be bad guests. We figured we'd blew the whole thing out of proportion and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am big into true crime, spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time we actually drove up the driveway. Towards the top of the hill part of the driveway, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, then got out of the car and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks, we couldn't find where the footprints ended. The property was quite large with tons of trees and bushes, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry. We would just have the officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. We drove down the road till we got service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The police officer scanned the property and determined there was no one out there. Obviously, we were a little shaken up and a lot embarrassed. We thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in a hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors and watched a movie, champagneless. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m, we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights, laughing about how the night didn't turn out as we'd planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open a garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning. Like I said, we woke up to all of the lights on, and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were there, and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. We sat crouched in the Airbnb praying for the police to arrive. We knew whoever had made those tracks was still on the property, and this time, they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang on our balcony as if someone threw something up onto it. I was losing my absolute shit when the operator told me the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search the property. We heard banging on the door. It was the police. We were okay. At the door were 2 policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around the snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed the police officer in the back as the officer that did the initial check on the property. The police officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked, and again there was no signs of someone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the police officer said that the road conditions were too dangerous that time of night. I looked at the police officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, again locking all the doors, and tried to sleep. The next day we were leaving, and while we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I wanted to leave. As we packed, we heard the same noise we heard at 3 a.m. It was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage. The sound lasts the same duration. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and walked away. As if. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just the perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back on this story a lot, and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the same reason. But whoever drove onto the property and walked around, thank you for triggering all of my nightmares. Please stay home, and oh yeah, let's not meet. Story 7. By Reddit user boozyJackUzi. So I moved to Toronto in June 2017 from the UK, and one of my housemates at the time had invited me to come stay at his friend's cottage in rural Quebec, to which I quickly accepted. To paint the picture, this cottage was in well off the beaten track of the mountains and hilly terrain of Quebec, and it had a lake on its doorstep. I believe this was one of maybe 3 cottages in the area. The first night we got wasted, and I woke up the second day pretty hungover. However, the 4 of us decided to take the car to get cigarettes and booze from our convenience store on this mountain about 20 minutes away in the middle of nowhere. We picked up beer, and instead of getting straight back into the car, we decided to crack a beer and go for a walk down this wooded trail across the road from the standalone convenience store. We get about 15 minutes into this walk, and I was getting the impression the trail hadn't been used in a long time. There was brambles and trees taking up the path which we had to climb over. However, eventually we came to this stream which blocked us from going any further. On the other side of the stream, there was what looked to be an abandoned cabin. This is the creepy part. We were laughing and joking, I think maybe smoking a cigarette, when all of a sudden this lady comes walking out from this cabin, holding a handsaw and a drill. She walks up to the other side of the stream and proceeds to just stare directly at us. I started getting this super creepy feeling, and I know everyone felt it too, but just held face. Anyway, the staring went on for about 5 minutes, until eventually she just went back into this Leatherface-looking shed or cabin. I managed to snap a quick video. On the video, I paused it and took a screenshot of what hands down is the scariest looking person I've ever seen in my life. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Once again, I hope you enjoyed my narration, and if you did, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I am almost at my next milestone of 25,000 subscribers, for which I am planning a Q&A video. If you have any questions, you can message me on Twitter @HorrorNarrative, my new Mr. Sinister subreddit, or post questions in the comment section to this video. If you want to support my channel even further, consider purchasing a t-shirt or hoodie with my new logo on from my recently launched Teespring store. Finally, if you have a story you would like me to narrate on this channel, you can email me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching.